Hi, my name is Jose Gutierrez. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Westlands Water District. Today we're going to give a summary of how the water year is shaping up in terms of precipitation and snowpack, and look at the corresponding allocation. We'll compare that to an allocation that we received in the past, and look at impacts of timing of allocation and how that impacts our farmers. So let me start with a summary of the precipitation that we were blessed with. This year we had above normal precipitation. The last time we spoke was towards the end of April, and at that time for the 8-station index, and just a reminder again, the 8-station index measures average precipitation from the north border of California down to about the delta. And when we last spoke, the total precipitation was about 61 inches, and since that time we've added about 9 inches, and we're up around 70 inches total. I mean, that's almost 20 inches above average for the 8-station index. And we had similar high precipitation for the 5-station index. And the 5-station index runs from, it's about the central California, runs from the delta in the north down to the San Joaquin River in the south. And when we last spoke, we were down around 44 inches, and that is now at about 50 inches. And that's about 10 inches more than average for this 5-station index, and we've added about 6 inches since the last time we spoke. So we were blessed with above normal precipitation. That was great. And this is also illustrated here in the 8-station index, and you can tell which months were the really high months. February was a great month, nearly 3 times the average. And May was a strong month compared to the average. And actually, if you even look at September, we're finishing the year strong, and it's not a lot of precipitation, but it's still almost twice the average. But it just wasn't the rain that we were blessed with. We were actually blessed with high snow water content, and that's illustrated here. You've got 3 sections: the north, central, and southern parts of the Sierra, and this year is represented in this blue line. And as you can see, this blue line compared to 2016-17, the year that we received 100% allocation, these 2 years are about the same for the north, a little lower for the central and south, but pretty darn close. So we had snow water content that was equivalent to the 100% allocation year. We had above normal precipitation, but our allocation was only 75%. Compared to what we thought maybe should have been an allocation of 100% for this year, considering the precipitation and the snow water content. So, yeah, we were disappointed. I mean, 75% allocation is a healthy allocation, but in a year when it should have been 100%, perhaps we would have pumped no groundwater this year. And this year, I think we're tracking to pump about 65,000, 70,000 acre-feet of groundwater in Westlands, and it would have been great if the allocation had been 100%. We probably would have pumped maybe 10,000, 20,000 acre-feet of groundwater, very little. I'd like to show you a comparison in precipitation for this year and in the 2010-2011 water year, which corresponds to the 2011 contract year. So the precipitation in those years were about the same. If you look at February, they were nearly identical, and then they tracked very similarly through the end of spring and into summer. They're very close. So looking at the precipitation, and I would suspect that the snow water content also tracked about the same for this period. So looking at those two, you would expect that the allocation would be about the same for that year and the current year. But actually it was different. That year we ended the year with an 80% allocation. This year we ended the year with a 75% allocation. One might say, well, that's about the same. But I'd like to point out one important difference, and that's what reclamation opened with and how they increased the allocation, how early they ended with the final allocation in that year. So in 2011, reclamation opened with a 50% allocation, and this year they opened with 35%. By March, they both increased to 55%. However, in 2011, there were 2 increases in March. It went from 55 to 65%. And then in April in 2011, it went to 75% and then ended 80%. Whereas this year, we went from 55% in March, 65% in April, 70 in May, and then ended 75% in June. The timing is important because if Reclamation announces a 35% allocation in February, as a farmer, you're wondering, where am I going to get my supplemental water? How am I going to finish the year and irrigate my crops? So in February, March, farmers are making very early commitments to buy supplemental water. And supplemental water is water purchased on the open market and at spot market prices. And this year, supplemental water in Westlands was more than 2 times the cost of CVP contract supply. So you're paying twice as much money for supplemental water that you're buying on the open market compared to CVP water that you would receive from Reclamation. Now, after you've made that commitment to buy supplemental water in February and March, Reclamation increases its allocation and eventually ends up at 75%. However, you've already made commitments to buy that water. You've paid for that water. Now it's in your account. Now Reclamation layers on more CVP allocation. The problem with that is, now what do you do with that water? If you didn't plant the crops because you expected a low allocation, now you might have more water left over in your account than you planned because you received now CVP allocation. Now you have more water than you know what to do with. You don't have the crops to irrigate with that water, so you end up carrying that water into next year. The problems that creates is the water that you've purchased in your CVP allocation, that water is stored in San Luis Reservoir. San Luis Reservoir has about a 2 million acre foot capacity, about a million acre foot for the federal side and about a million acre feet for the state side. And San Luis Reservoir currently is about 1.2 million acre feet. Total storage is 2 million acre feet, and we each have our share. But if the reservoir is 60% full today, we haven't entered the wet season. If we have a normal precipitation year, they start exporting water out of the delta. San Luis Reservoir starts to refill in the wintertime. There's a chance that when it's full, it won't have enough storage capacity to store the new year water that's being pumped today or last year's water. And since it doesn't have enough capacity to store last year's water, the supplemental water, the expensive supplemental water that our farmers purchase, gets pushed out and eventually spills and is lost. That's why it's important that the allocation from Reclamation be timely, be early, and be certain, so that our water users aren't buying expensive supplemental water, because it's too much risk. You might end up losing that water and losing money because you didn't have a chance to use it. The other thing I'd like to point out of the impacts of this type of allocation pattern is that when Reclamation announces a 35% allocation in February, water users might shift, more than likely they'll shift to pumping groundwater. So they start pumping groundwater out of the ground, delivering groundwater instead of surface water. The problem with that is, going forward with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, if they pump that groundwater, they're cutting into a supply that is now going to be regulated by the state. So there's only going to be a certain amount of groundwater that you can pump going forward. So having this type of allocation pattern impacts two things: impacts the timing and the need to purchase expensive supplemental water and making that commitment. But now you're also pumping groundwater, but you need to be saving that groundwater for real serious droughts when there's no surface water supply, because of SGMA and because of the restrictions on groundwater pumping going forward. So those are the big impacts that we experienced this year because of this type of allocation announcement and the patterns of the allocation. And ultimately, the 75%, the allocation should have ended up the year at 100% allocation. I guess we're all hopeful, though, that going forward and working with Reclamation and with a normal precipitation year, with the reservoirs being so full as they are today, that the allocation for next year, for the 2020 water contract year, hopeful that the allocations will be higher and hopefully 100% for our farmers. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. See you next time.